Hello and welcome. An interference of free speech or a protection from hate? That's the big debate now over Britain's decision to ban entry to the controversial Dutch politician Geert Wilders. It raises the question of whether or not there is a limit to free speech and how much protection there should be against possible incitement of hate. Wilders was initially invited by a member of Britain's House of Lords to showcase his short anti-Islamic film Fitna, but was then rejected after the government felt his opinions posed a threat to one of the, quote, fundamental interests of society and would threaten community harmony and therefore public security in the UK. The 17-minute documentary cites selected excerpts from the Quran while displaying images from the 9/11 attacks in America and bombings in Madrid and London, suggesting that the Quran is responsible for Islamic extremism. The controversial MP, who's facing legal issues in the Netherlands for hate speech, has gained some support for freedom of speech, while others feel he has only provoked hatred and support the ban. The case has highlighted the divisions in society on the issue of fundamental rights. On today's programme we ask, is there a limit to free speech? Remember, we want to hear from you and you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and take part, and we also welcome your phone calls on the show. My guests today sit on opposite sides of the debate around Geert Wilders and his film. Baroness Sarah Ludford is spokeswoman for the British Liberal Democrats in the European Parliament on the Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee. She feels Mr. Wilders' views are unacceptable, but argues that he deserves his right to free speech and should not be banned. Baroness Ludford is in London, and joining us from Manchester is Mohammed Shafiq, Chief Executive and a founding member of the Manchester-based Ramadan Foundation, one of the UK's principal Muslim youth organisations. Mr. Shafiq supports Britain's ban and feels that this is not an impediment of free speech, but is actually prevention of religious hatred. I want to welcome you both to the show and start with Baroness Ludford, if I may, and start by asking at what point should freedom of speech be curbed? What threshold should be set for what can and can't be said?
Well, I'm glad you pointed out that I found Wilders' views unacceptable. They're offensive and insulting. And it is a difficult line to draw between highly offensive views, which would nonetheless enjoy the right of free speech, and incitement to violence and hatred. And that is a line which the courts have to draw, and it would be interesting to see what happens in the Netherlands, where a court has instructed prosecutors to examine whether he should face charges. And I personally think that it should be a relatively high threshold, and I note that the British government, in banning him from entering, which has of course given him huge publicity and given him more, airing of his views, they did actually not say that it was incitement to hatred. They said it would be a threat to community harmony. Now, I watched his film. It is very unpleasant in the way he demonises all Muslims from the unacceptable activities of a few, of a minority, of people who preach violence and anti-Semitism and so on. But he completely distorts and twists everything, and I would much rather shower him with invitations, which of course he's such a hypocrite that he refuses to accept, to debate in public. When a Dutch Muslim TV station last year invited him, he turned it down. And he wants to ban the Quran. I mean, for a man who stands up for free speech, he is deeply inconsistent, hypocritical. But nonetheless, I want his views to be aired and to be counteracted and contradicted by those of us who disagree with him. So I think actually it's been counterproductive banning him. He's got far more publicity. He poses as a martyr that he's been silenced. And actually, we should ridicule him, make fun of him, and marginalise this man.
Well, Mohammed Shafiq, there's interesting points there, of course, and we have pointed out Baroness Ludford doesn't support his views, just merely his right to freedom of speech, perhaps to expose him, yeah. And so I should say, isn't that really quite fair to say, well, listen, let this man have his say, whatever his views, and let him expose himself?
I think the important debate to have is not about freedom of speech, but with freedom of speech comes responsibility. So I have the right to swear at somebody's mother, but I choose not to express that right, free speech, on the basis that I do not wish to offend anyone. Mr. Wilder, as you rightly say, is not open for the debate. I wrote to his office only last week asking him for a public debate in the Netherlands or anywhere else in the world, anytime, anywhere, and the Ramadan Foundation will live up to that challenge. He's not been able to come forward for the debate. The issue is, do we, by allowing people like him to promote his hatred and his fascism and his anti-Islamic views are in a sense giving it to a wider audience. And I don't subscribe to the view that you know, by banning him somehow we've made him a martyr. I think what's happened here is that the government has to take a consistent line. There are people like Louis Farrakhan, Yusuf al-Qaradawi and other you know, preachers who've been banned from this country, and I think the government has had to show a balanced view in terms of the different faiths.
We'll get on to some of those in a moment. Let me just let our viewers see a clip from this film, Fitna, just to illustrate exactly how it does offend a lot of people. And here's a short clip from it.
والمشركين أعداءك أعداء الدين اللهم احصهم عددا وقتلهم بددا ولا تغادر منهم أحدا. الله يحمي ونكافر في والمشركين أعداءك أعداء الدين.
A clip there from that controversial film, Fitna. Now, I want to ask Mohammed Shafiq now to address an email that we were sent from the USA, from Arman Bagdoyan in Boston, who says the right of free speech should be universal and all interested parties must have the same type of access to the public. We all know that Muslims do not enjoy equal exposure in the Western media. The difference should be made up somehow. Let the guy screen his film, but let the Muslims have the right and means to strip him bare. Now, it goes to the point I was making about allowing him in and then revealing his views to be extreme as they are. And it makes me wonder if you have objected to the banning of you know, the British government's banning of certain Muslim leaders and imam coming in. Isn't it you know, hypocritical or double standard to advocate the banning of this man?
Well, we're a multi-faith society that really demonstrates that there is so much diversity in our country. There is so much value that different faiths and different communities bring to this country. Islam brings great value to this country. And for films like Mr. Wilder and his nasty comments that he's making, he's trying to tarnish the whole Muslim faith system. And let me just say to you, in terms of what you've just shown, the clear point here to raise is that Islam totally forbids the killing of innocent people. Now, whether that be here in London, be in Washington, or be in Gaza or anywhere else, Islam totally condemns that, forbids that. So anybody who carries out such activities is not carrying them out in the name of Islam. Let me give you an example. You know, for many years we've been having this debate around the Roman Catholic Church and child abuse. We're not going to hold the Roman Catholic Church responsible for child abuse just because a few bad apples have committed sinful acts. So I think you've got to be a bit more balanced in the viewpoint here.
Okay, and now interesting point you make, and it should be clear, I guess, that the film is very selective in the way it takes the excerpts and the way it portrays them, and the connection is obviously very insightful. Let me ask you though, if Baroness Ludford, if I could ask you about your idea of a high threshold for banning people. What about, there are certain laws in broadcasting, for example, in Britain, they're very strict. In fact, we're regulated by Ofcom, the regulations of the Office of Telecommunications, on issues such as blasphemy, the issues such as, for example, in Britain, even saying something against the royal family.
Let me immediately say that I and my party would abolish the offence of blasphemy, which of course only protects the Christian religion. I mean, we don't want it generalised to protect all religions. We say it should be abolished. So I think we're reasonably consistent. Yes, I mean, I just think that, as I said, it's a difficult line to draw, what is incitement to hatred, but it must be a real incitement to actually go out and commit hate and violence against people, rather than, when I say just, I'm not trying to minimise insulting and offensive views. I entirely agree with Mohammed Shafiq that there's freedom of speech doesn't mean there's an obligation to go around offending people, but I do think we're a pretty robust society in Britain, and I also celebrate the diversity and the richness and the contribution of Islam and Muslims, and we are multi-faith, and I appreciate that, but we are also robust, and both in the Netherlands and in Britain, and if we can't deal with this minor figure who has these thoroughly objectionable views and deal with him in our debates and discourses, well then I think that's a little bit of a poor reflection. And can I also say that I've objected to the British Labour government's criminalisation of what they call the glorification of terrorism, which has also had a chilling effect on free speech. Someone who says, for instance, that they believe that the invasion of Iraq, which the Labour government backed, of course, and participated in, might have radicalised people. They risk coming under anti-terrorism laws. And it is the same government that has banned Geert Wilders. So they're also being inconsistent and I think hypocritical.
Let's get a couple of calls in here. Bart in New Zealand, thanks for your patience. Go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, wouldn't you rather know who your enemies are than, by them exposing themselves with their words and having these people walk around and not knowing who they are? And also, how will you know what reality is if you only listen to the things that you find acceptable?
Mohammed Shafiq, I guess the scary part is that actually the fact people have these kind of views does actually occur out there and perhaps should be addressed a little more openly.
Riz, I've always been of the view that we're open and strong enough to have an honest and open debate about the rights and wrongs of Islam. And if Mr. Wilder or anybody else wants to have that debate, I'm sure there are numerous scholars and figures in the Muslim world who can live up to that debate. But that debate's going to be done in a rational way. It's going to be done in a respectful way, away from demonising and attacking the whole community. Sarah goes on to talk about, it's making minor points, but I think the point that you have to make here is this man is preaching that he says all Muslims are terrorists, the Quran should be banned. I mean, what more is incitement than that?
We'll look at some of the potential responses of the community.
If I went around and said, no, but Riz, if I went around and said that the Torah should be banned, can you imagine the uproar that would happen in Western Europe?
I'm going to touch on this, Mohammed. I'm going to touch on some of this.
Less of anger.
Actually, that's an interesting point I'm going to touch on. But let's quickly get Idris on the line from Holland, who's been waiting patiently. Idris, let's get this question in. Go on.
Hi, Riz. I live in Holland, and I heard a lot from Geert Wilders, a lot about his stories, but at the beginning, people, they started believing him a little bit. He was more moderate at that time, but now that his colors are really clear, so most of the Dutch people, I'm not going to say all the Dutch people, they really don't like him and they don't like to hear about him, and they feel that they are misrepresented outside the world by what he's saying. So,
all right, Idris, thank you very much. Thanks for that. Actually, an interesting comment as we take a break. That of course this man represents the Dutch people as well, and from what Idris is saying, a lot of people there are fed up. We have many more topics to touch on this issue. We're going to take a short break now. As we pause, let me remind you, you can join the conversation with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com. You can see the chat room taking place in the online there right now, and we're also taking a poll asking in the chat room: should Dutch Member of Parliament Geert Wilders have been allowed to enter the UK to air his views on Islam? Let us know what you think on that question, and we'll be right back.